Hey there, this is Matt, and I wanted to come back from the end of recording this video to briefly explain what this is going to be. This is not a typical video like the other ones on my channel, and this is going to be more of a commentary on my observations of King Gizzard's catalog over the years. I don't want to get too much into the content itself. I'm going to talk enough about it for about the next hour. And if that's something that's of any interest, then without further ado, here is the video. Thank you. And as a small word of advice in between, I would recommend watching this video at 2 times speed if you're interested in the content alone. I'm going to be pretty much taking the thoughts at my own pace. I've done my best to edit out most of the ums and stuff that don't impede the actual content. But then again, it's completely up to you. It's kind of a chill video, so if you want to just sit and put this on while you're doing something else, that's cool too. Anyways, enjoy. This is a video I've been wanting to make for a long time now. At first, it started as an idea of continuing my coverage on releases from sequential albums from this band, but I guess in a way I've come to my senses on a few things and realized that I wanted to talk about something a little bit more broad. And while that's not normally been a focus of my videos, I think that this is a topic that deserves some attention, I guess. The focus of this video is going to be on the band's discography post Rat's Nest. I think this is a fair point to make this transition, as it was a large point in the shift in the band's framework, their style of production over quarantine. There's just a lot of things that kind of happen over this period of time that I think led to more changes in how the band works and operates differently than they did before. Yeah, so without meandering much more for too much longer, I'm going to go ahead and just start with everything that's taken place since album 15 and talk about the differences between before and after, and what is happening with a lot of the music that King Gizzard's making nowadays versus the music that they were making before. I'm not necessarily going to be talking about whether it's for the better or worse. I can go ahead and say I'm a huge fan of all of their work, regardless of anything I say in this video. This is merely me nitpicking and going very, very far too deep into a discussion on something that really doesn't matter, but it also does matter because it's an interesting topic, and I think it's tempting to be able to jump on to saying that, everything that comes from a band as great as King Giz with a huge devoted fan base is always going to be great, and in a way it always will be. There's something that definitely keeps it sort of, I guess, I don't know, incubated, or what's the better word? It's not the right word at all. I guess like immortalizes a bunch of their work in a way with how avid of a fan base they have. But yeah, I guess what I'm going to try and do here is go through, well, first I'm going to kind of give a little bit of context. I want to describe where I came in as far as being a listener and a follower of the band, just so that I feel like it's important to explain how and where I fit in all of this, I guess. I feel like there's definitely many different contexts that this could be approached with. If, say, you were a fan since, 2011, or if you hopped in around 2015 or 2017 or 2021 or however. But I think it's important to at least outline where I'm coming from before going into this, because it's going to be important for probably the reasons I have these opinions. So without further ado, I can remember, I'm most certain that I believe Doom City was the first song that I heard on KEXP, as I'm sure many people can relate to discovering the band via that station. And pretty quickly was I enamored by everything that they were doing. Something infectious is always present in their live performance. I don't think that's ever really gone away. That's probably a good thing to mention, is that this is in no way a valid critique or discussion towards the band as live performers. This is solely an observation. Oh, that's a text message. I'm sorry. I need to probably disable those. So this is more of a observation / analysis / discussion about the studio albums and their progression over the years, and really just my opinions on a lot of them. I know I've gone through the explained process a few times, and really that in itself is not even an accurate title. It's merely, a fun way to engage with the community. It's a good way to talk about albums I really like. But really at the end of the day, it's, not, some of it is constructive. A lot of it is, very highly subjective. I wouldn't say that any of it really lends itself to much more than talking about any one of their other albums, because a lot of the content at the end of the day does really bleed across records, which I wouldn't say as much as a critique, rather than, an observation of their music, an observation of their craft, what they're known for. That's not really something that I'm looking to pick apart as much as I am wanting to observe and discuss what is there, what is on the table. I'm not going to be trying to look for things that aren't there. I'm trying to be as fair in this discussion as I possibly could be. So just to get that kind of out of the way. But to move kind of forward from that, I want to pick up, I guess, around, like I was saying, having discovered them, I guess it must have been late 2016 or whenever the date for that KEXP was released, or maybe it was probably after the fact in 2017. That might make a little bit more sense. But I listened to Microtonal Banana and then found myself, I believe it was right around the time Sketches came out, I became very, very interested in Sketches. As someone who is a huge fan of Mild High Club to this day, that record was, a near perfect gem, as others who kind of relate in that kind of headspace, I'm sure, would agree. From there, it kind of just spiraled. So, 2017 was sort of the year that I got into them. I know a lot of fans have been, around and there much longer than the 2017 group, although that is when they became, a little bit more mainstream, a little bit more widely known, widely popular, having already been to the States a few times. And there was definitely a lot to discover at that time. And I can't even imagine what it would be like for someone today to discover the band and say, oh, I'm going to have to, acclimate myself to the 24, at the time of this recording, 24 studio records that exist. And then not to say any of the live albums or footage or film or anything like that. So it was definitely a good time to hop on, a good time to be inspired as well, just by everything that they were doing. And there was there's something very, very particular about the way that those records are recorded, as well as the ones that precede it, that have something to it. And I don't know if this is one of my points, I guess, that I'm getting to, is that it feels as though over time the band was always doing, their own mixing, with Stu doing a bunch of their mixing for albums and whatnot, but it feels like they really, really got more hands-on towards the production of Rat's Nest, being kind of one of the first that was completely kind of in their wheelhouse of production. I know that they've always worked with a handful of friends that are also, engineers or doing recording or recording with the Tropical Fuckstorm crew, or with Alex Breton of Mild High Club, or I'm just trying to pick off the top of my head anyone else. But I'm aware that they've recorded with a couple other people for their records, but I know that kind of since Rat's Nest, it seems as though everything has been even more so in this DIY box of, working with an Ableton, using everything that is kind of immediately available to them in interviews, hearing them discuss the importance of getting music released and not really stressing over the details, kind of just like finding the most effective way to release the music. And there's a little bit to talk about there. I think even with as prolific as they were in 2017, there was a little bit more attention to detail going on in different aspects of how those records came to be in the end. I guess when I say that, I mean that the production from start to finish, there was a lot of time that still went into developing those songs live, and as we can see through other live performances, some of those songs on Murder of the Universe and Microtonal Banana, as well as sketches of, oh God, I'm going to butcher the name again, Sketches of Brunswick East. Pardon me if I'm wrong with that pronunciation, but I know that a handful of tracks on many of those records in the whole 5-album year preceded 2016, or were at least being performed in 2016. So it's not to say that, all that material was written around that time. Some of it, had dated back years and years. And I know that's, the case with a lot of their music whenever they do have kind of a lot of material going out at once. But I definitely felt that there was more of this polished, fully fleshed out, everything being very carefully kind of planned and considered. And of course, with, all of their music videos and artwork going along with it, just kind of hitting this iconic after iconic after iconic trend that really seemed like it wasn't going to come to any kind of, lull at any point in time. It just felt like every record they were making was, the next King Gizzard record that had to exist. It felt like no mistakes could almost be made in a funny way. I don't know. Maybe that just stands to a testament of me knowing, or me being familiar with the band in a certain point in time. And, it's been, several years since those records were recorded and released. So maybe it's natural for something like this to eventually become sort of my mindset on it. But it's something that I wanted to discuss because I just wonder how many other people are maybe in the same frame of mind, but don't want to say that they are in that frame of mind. And I don't really mean that as any kind of diss towards how they make music or how they write songs, like now versus before. But I want to talk about some of that because I think we can easily see, just from observing their discography pre-Rat's Nest and post-Rat's Nest, kind of with Rat's Nest being this fine line, this kind of gray area in between, with outliers of, fishies and sort of getting into that KGLW territory, being this gray area included in all of that, where the formula is definitely more present than ever before. And the band are, somewhat leaning into this more, I guess, I don't know. To me, it feels as though they lean more heavily nowadays into, pop-focused sort of, I don't know, just more generally appealing songwriting strategy that works really well for them. I think that everything that they do now is really great. I only listen to the newer King Gizzard albums. I can say that. It's always been something, there's been some part of me that's always wanted to feel as though I'm understanding or staying with them, or staying, at the pace of whatever mindset a band is working through, whether it be this band or another. It's always most intriguing, most fulfilling, most satisfying to be able to relate through an artist's most recent release in their discography, just because I feel like I'm really understanding what they're trying to say, or kind of what frame of mind they're in. And I feel like it's an important thing to, I don't know, to remind myself of whenever I'm listening to music, or when I'm listening to musicians that I really like the people for, I guess, if that makes sense. I didn't say that very, very well, but whenever I enjoy listening to an artist and the artist also happens to be good people, I like to familiarize myself with how that artist enjoys making their art in the current moment, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So with that being said, I listen to a lot of the current music, but it doesn't quite fill that same feeling of records that came out before, which I find really interesting. And I feel like that could easily be written off as a, recency bias kind of thing, or a, having given the context that I found the band during that period of time with the 5 records, that was just such a fulfilling time to discover them. I feel like it's easy to write that off as so, but I think there's more to explore there that, I think that there's at least more to say in defense of that. So I'd like to kind of go there for a second. So yeah, let's kind of talk about this. So with the records, Flying Microtonal Banana, Murder of the Universe, Sketches, Polygon Dwandaland, Gumboot Soup, all of those records were albums that were, in my rotation that year. I was just getting started with them. I hadn't quite gotten into some of their older material, being, the Mind Fuzz stuff or Nonagon. I familiarized myself with their earlier discography not too much longer after the rest of it, but even those records, and I think this is one of my first points of kind of in defense of their earlier discography, is that there's still this attention to detail and this attention to polish and charm and just this robust honesty of their earlier records that holds true from the very beginning through Rat's Nest. And I would, to be even more specific, I would hold Chunky Shrapnel into that little wagon as well. Just to kind of say that this was a period of time in which all of their work was so not just incredibly honest, but well captured in a way that I feel at least embodies the band's spirit in the most colorful way that it could at the time. And in contrast to that, everything kind of post Shrapnel feels, I guess, comparatively, drier, or I guess I would say with dry, it feels slightly less colorful, so more gray, I guess, if that makes sense. I'll talk more about that. I can remember specifically when Honey came out. I was pretty excited. It was the first, single in a long time. I'm sure many people were very excited to know that they were releasing more music through, kind of the lockdown and stuff. And it was exciting. And I remember when the sister albums, KG and LW, finally released, and I gave the two of them, several listens front to back, there was a recognizable shift in production, which I immediately looped into the fact that these records were made asynchronously. And I think that there is, a little bit of padding I can give there as far as knowing that these two records could not have been made to be the same kind of experience that, all these other albums that have been released have been. And I think that was a moment where I felt weirdly, I guess, slightly disappointed in a certain aspect, but also very, feels like every time that the band releases new music, you can be nothing but excited to see what they're trying to do. And it's not to say that these albums don't have good songs on them. I think that there's several really, really great songs. And I, can wholeheartedly say that I enjoy listening to all of the songs on both of these records easily. So I'm not trying to say that. I just want to keep it in mind and keep it, up front that I enjoy immensely all of the music that is still coming out to this day. But I think that it's important to kind of bring up this shift in time where the production and the attention to the details and, the songs and how they're structured just becomes a little bit more loose, I guess. There's a much more broad, open theme across KG and LW. And I'm forgetting now that I even did the LW explained video, which, kind of, if you bring it back to the sketches or I guess more relevantly, the Fishies video, carry over a lot of the same environmentalist sort of themes, playing a little bit more into, specific, clues that link to the real world. I think that's something in a lot of their newer music that is much more prevalent than it was before, are the references to, real world politics or people, which I'm all here for. I think it's a really great touch that kind of casts this shadow on their older material being a little bit more vague, more fantastical, more, enveloped in its own conceptuality. So yeah, that's kind of my immediate reception on KGLW was kind of like that. And then a little bit longer, goes by and Butterfly 3000 comes out, and this was definitely more in the direction that I felt was acceptable, if that makes sense, for a King Gizzard record. And I think that the way that they went about promoting and releasing this record kind of all at once, no singles, it's somewhat, bright, happy concept and electronic backbone really was something I had been waiting for them to do for a long time, and reinstated, a feeling that I kind of lost across the previous two albums that had come out. But still there was this feeling of detachment, I guess, from kind of what they would typically do, which, not a bad thing at all. Just another observation of, several music videos at this point not being done by one of their key artists, Jason Galea, and them having, several of these videos for Butterfly 3000 being done by different artists. Also something that I'm very much into. I love seeing how the band is leaning more into artists interpreting their work a lot more in the modern, in the modern day now, as opposed to having Jason Galea do every single one of their videos, as, brilliant as he is at kind of crafting that experience. So this change at this point is something that is really starting to show in a lot of their film and a lot of the work that they do on camera, as far as being much more interpretive, just a little bit more lenient on the translation of these songs onto the screen. I think that's something that had a lot more focus, and they were much more specific about really relating the sound or the genre or the feel of a song onto a video in a way that was, almost directly correlated to what was being written or kind of the atmosphere of that song in general. And I think you could argue against me on that very easily, as far as saying that, a lot of these videos really do, play into the themes of the songs that they're supporting quite nicely. And I agree with that for the most part. If you were to, tell me why a certain video off Butterfly 3000, why the animation or why the story does still lean into the theme that it's trying to convey. I just think that it's being done in a way that is much more broad and open to an interpretation outside of the band's, whereas before it felt like the band was directing every experience that was being shared to the fan base. And I think, this is a byproduct of their exponential growth over the years. I think it's only natural that in order to keep up with themselves and to continue to be as prolific as they are, that some kind of change would be introduced to the, formula. But it's funny that in a way, the band has also doubled down on being even more formulaic in their songwriting. And that's also not meant to be harsh in any way, as much as it may sound. And this is where I'm going to jump into Omnium. I think Omnium there's a lot to say about Omnium in this respect, because this album has so many songs where, and this is a King Gizzard thing. This is definitely not a new thing, but it is something that I have never noticed more in my time being a fan of their music until this album. And I think it's because their sort of identity of concept records began to change around that KGLW mark, where, you've got the King Gizzard thing, where the name of the song is the chorus of the song many times. And that's something that, has been around for forever and ever. But I feel like it's never been more blatant and more easily written, I guess, or kind of tongue-in-cheek than it is now. And it's funny to kind of talk about this, because it feels like there isn't as much to say on the matter than there is just to observe. But this is really meant to be my own reflection, just to see if other people have kind of gone down this little, hole of thought regarding the band's trajectory and their music, kind of then versus now. Because I feel like the writing and to some degree even the performances and the instrumentals have just gotten the slightest bit, I don't want to say bland, because there are brilliant performances across these records, and I don't even really agree with myself that it is the performance. I think what I'm trying to get at is that the production is downright flat some of the time, and there is a serious lack of dynamic just growth or change throughout a lot of their newer records. They feel kind of like one peak that continues to, really, really pump out the songs and the noise and the choruses and the hooks and whatnot, without really making as serious as an impact as fans might have experienced on their earlier records. I felt this way when I first heard the studio version of The Dripping Tap, and felt even more so in agreement with myself on this general idea after seeing the band live post-quarantine. I think that was a huge, huge aid in kind of giving myself a little bit more context as to who this band is, out there live versus who they are on the albums. And I feel like, there's a lot more of this studio process to recording their music nowadays, as far as, them not performing sort of all the time as a band whenever recording or something like that. There's, plenty of footage of them kind of taking that approach with a lot of their earlier records. But even still, moving on to Ice Death, there is a lot to unpack here as far as the lack of, I guess, just a little bit more attention to dynamically producing these songs to be fulfilling experiences to to their fullest potential. Because, again, I must say that Ice Death, out of their modern releases, out of the releases, post Rat's Nest, Ice Death is a record that I come back to over and over again because of how loose and how much, they decided to really break their own formula in a lot of ways. I found it, very refreshing that they were going to enter this jam territory. And while I was, mildly apprehensive, I was completely blown away at my first listen of Ice Death. And the worst thing I think I have to say is that with every listen, I start to see just a little bit how shallow a little bit of these, or how shallow a handful of these mixes kind of go. I feel like one that stands out here that most people would agree with is the structure and composition of Ice 5 and Iron Lung. And I think that even that in itself is more of a testament to the songwriting, I guess, rather the editing, if these, studio versions came together in editing. But I think that's more of a testament to how these songs were put together rather than how they were recorded. Because still, I, maybe listening to the Red Rocks live compilation and thinking, wow, I really wish that the guitars or the drums, had this, much more dynamic and deeper kind of feeling in production that they really don't have on the record. Everything kind of feels a little bit more like one straight line, like I was talking about, one kind of flat peak that continues on and on. And I think that, for certain songs, that is the technique to go for. I just think when it comes to them being energetic or, really portraying themselves as performers playing together, which is a key facet of this record, I think it's something that shouldn't be as undermined as it is. Right. Okay. So I'm going to move on from that. I don't want to dwell for too long in any one place. I don't mean to try and, begin to rant on any particular topic. But I want to keep this kind of moving forward. So we're going to talk about the duo Clock Records, Timeland and Laminated Denim. This is an important moment as far as I don't know how much more I could stress that Made in Timeland is, in my opinion, one of the most interesting amalgamations of sound on an album that I feel like has been shared on the internet. I don't know. There's some kind of X factor thing going on with Made in Timeland. I love, the fearless combination of the electronic and, live styles. I like the little bit of, jam that's thrown into moments of Timeland. I think that there's just something incredibly unique about that record, as well as, the way that it was kind of, I would say the way that it was marketed, but I should really say the way that it wasn't marketed, that really brought it to the forefront of, kind of, I guess you could say more serious King Gizzard fans, as lame as that sounds. And to this day, I think, I would say it is hands down my favorite record that they've released in a very long time, next to Sketches, just because of how much new, I don't know, it's the composition, it's the production, it's doing its own concept that hadn't been done yet. I think that's, my only real gripe with Laminated Denim, aside from similar qualms related to what I'd said about Ice Death, about the performances really not being captured and mixed and produced in a way that does the songs as much justice as they could have. Because when you hear them play these songs live, it's so much more impactful. And I feel like all that you could wish for is to have those be the album versions, and not kind of these shallower, less hard-hitting versions of songs as the album versions. Yeah, I don't want to linger here too long either, because there really isn't as much to say. The concept is fairly straightforward. I think that, is another, slight critique. But, they're working outside of the box within a very limiting framework for 2 records. And I think that, they deserve a lot of credit there for, trying these out. I'm aware that, the Timeland record started as the interlude music for their live festival, but I think even with that said, if that wasn't the intention going in, even if it was the intention going in, I think I would still say that they kind of struck gold on something that they might not have even, wanted to try in the first place, just kind of jamming together or something. So this is the one standout moment where I'd say, post Rat's Nest, King Gizzard has hit something extremely unique that, no one is just going to stumble upon. So I have to give Timeland the most credit I could possibly give. But I guess I feel like I'm overhyping it, and I think I don't want to sell it short by saying this, but I think that it feels slightly unintentional, the effect that it does have, in being this sort of very beyond rock moment rock record in their discography, where they've done something very special that speaks to, a very niche kind of group of their fan base, or at least I'll say like a smaller percentage of their fan base, that are probably more into the, rock heavy, or, since they're kind of more genre splurge of, metal and various other, work that they've done. I'm sure there's a lot of other people that are much more into listening to most of their other standard records, which I completely understand. But I find Timeland most intriguing, most captivating, because it does, what no one else really has done on a single album. That's only 30 minutes. I think that the fact that, they're still playing with this idea of time and simultaneously not asking for too much of the listener's time, is really nice. And, that was also technically pre-Omnium, and the introduction of the littlest amount of rap included on Smoke and Mirrors was also a, incredible switch up to kind of be introduced to. I think it was a great way to segue anyone that heard that record prior to Omnium into the 2 tracks, Sadie Sorceress and Grim Reaper, on that album. I just think it really, that's a nice attention to detail that I miss across older records, is that it felt like you were kind of being prepared for what was coming next. And we'll get a little bit more into that, because that's something that has very recently happened, and I may, have to save for a future video or discussion of some kind. But I don't know if anyone's still listening at this point. I don't really expect anyone to, but this is the reason why I couldn't make another explained kind of video. It seemed easy enough in my head. I actually wrote an entire script for Omnium, as well as, let's see, what was it? I think it was, I had like a Murder of the Universe video as well. But, a lot of their music, speaks really on the nose about the themes and whatnot. It just felt like, there would be really no real reason to discuss them other than to kind of worship what they're doing. And I don't know, that at the end of the day, it is fun, and I did it for, the albums that I have reviewed. But I think what I wanted more was to be honest with how I feel about the band's trajectory up until this point, even as, like I've said numerous times now, a huge supporter of everything that they've done past and present. So yeah, I just kind of feel like I have to keep sort of placing that context in there, because I don't want this to at least come off as some long rant as to how King Gizzard have gone downhill or something. That's definitely not what I think is happening. I think that they have changed in, ways that are very observable, that I haven't seen very many people talk about in a calm, I guess more just neutral, orderly fashion, not some Facebook group rant or something. So I felt like this was something that just needed to exist, just to, open up a discussion, a conversation with anyone who's interested on how they've changed over the years, and, what's gotten really good and what has kind of come at the cost of them getting even better than, they know how to record themselves. And I don't think that they don't know how to record themselves or anything. I think that, they're making really great albums to this day and taking a little bit more of their typical production techniques for granted, maybe it feels like. I'm not really sure how to say that properly, but I think this is a good moment to kind of jump into my thoughts on Changes. This is the record I have the most gripe with as far as the specific production techniques that were used throughout. This is where I feel that I can easily kind of pick out several moments and talk about what I don't like specifically. So I can kind of just go right into that. I remember, I watched the Sleeping Monster short that came out with Change at the very end, and Change is a really cool song. I'm very much into the kind of through composition, how it, illustrates there's self-awareness of musicianship with the whole concept behind this record and the key changes, and also how it reflects the remaining tracks on the album throughout the natural progression of the song, having small sections within Change that demonstrate moments on each, successive track in chronological order. I think that it's a really brilliant touch, really unique attention to detail. Goes right into that boat of things that I wish that they would incorporate more of, but also falls flat on certain production levels as far as really hitting the highs with power and then hitting the lows without leaving enough space for a little bit of listener relatability, if that makes sense. Or hitting the lows, I guess I should say, with enough space for a listener to kind of reflect within the space that they're designing. And I'll talk more about that in a second. But first, I want to talk about the heavy section at the end of Change. I feel like Change is a great song up until this point, where they do get heavy at the end with the rock out section. I think that part is a fun, little last minute twist, but the really flat production there just leaves it kind of feeling not as powerful as it needs to be in the moment where a peak is supposed to occur. I'm immediately being reminded in my head of the kind of switch moment on Lava, where they change to the more powerful sort of chanting moment. But before the chanting comes in, it feels like there's, something left to be desired on a lot of these moments where they're meant to get heavier and the change is supposed to be more intense, but nothing's really happening with your ears as much. It's all kind of in the box production that I wish that they would kind of break out of. I think that they're really capturing that nice lo-fi aesthetic really nicely to this day, but that dynamic of sound versus silence, and just the mix quality itself feels oddly bland, and it makes the section itself feel out of place, which I don't feel is actually happening. I think that the songwriting in many cases is much better than the recording lends it to be. So let's continue on. I think Hate Dancin' is, funnily enough, the best sounding track on this record because of those reasons I was just kind of talking about. I think this is a song that really purposefully utilizes the production and the dynamics of the composition to really feed into the emotion and the experience. And the silence in this track is incorporated so intelligently because of that. It's just, very short, very simple and sweet. It's got one of their sillier concepts to date, but really sells itself for how well the song is mixed and how much kind of attack those drums have underneath them, how much kind of weight there is to this song by the time that you've listened to it. And I don't think that it is, modern King Gizzard at their best production, but I do feel like it is, admirable to a point given a lot of the work that they've put out more recently. So just a little highlight right there. I, really love the track AstroTurf. AstroTurf is a song that I really, really feel for, but, falls flat on its production in the same kind of regard, as well as the kind of absence of enough details going on. I think this is something that at this point I start to learn about why I'm not as much into changes, is because not only is the soundscape chasing this, same chords for every song utilized in a different way sort of idea, but it's not really tackling the listener in a way that is continuously engaging. And, that might, I've talked about this with others before, that might be, a reason why this record isn't really my thing, with the whole theoretical music, the theory behind this album. Maybe that in itself just isn't that strong of an idea that I felt that I would feel deserves an entire record. When I read that Change was initially meant to be the entire song and that was going to be the record, I think I would have liked that a lot more. I've already said that I'm not going to, critique things for what isn't there, but that kind of walks a fine line there. So I'm not sure if that counts, but let's just say it does, and I won't bring up anything more on that. I found, tracks Nobody, Short Change to be pretty forgettable. Not a whole lot to say there because that's really just how I felt about them. I think, again, more unique approaches to recording these songs as individual songs could have made the experience a whole lot more exquisite. And I like how neat that these tracks are, but as much as they are really curated, intentional experiences, it does feel like they're selling themselves short after they've released, entire records where they show that they know how to really pull out quality music from a short composition or a short piece of music. I think a track like Nobody or Short Change could have had much more to it. They've demonstrated, that kind of thing is possible before. That, even ties back to moments on Butterfly 3000 where it kind of, leaves a little bit more to be desired, where things kind of come to a close what feels like a little bit too quickly or too abruptly. So I think Exploding Suns is a nice feature on this album because of its tenderness, its vulnerability. It echoes something akin to the, more later tracks on Sketches, but also the, content of the lyrics and the songwriting is still, echoing the same messages that they've been saying across so many of their records for years, that while it is this, tender musical moment, and lyrically it really doesn't feel like it has a lot of depth, which is something I would say about a lot of the recent albums as far as, kind of feels like a little bit since the on the nose themes used in Fishies and Rat's Nest, that has kind of become much more of the upfront thesis for tons of their records. Not to say that that was not the subject matter prior to those albums, but that rather it's gotten much, much more discernible what the content is actually meant to convey, rather than it being more symbolic through some, fantastical exploitation of combining history with fantasy or something, as they had done on several records prior. So yeah, that kind of brings us up to speed until very recently with Petro. I'm not going to waste anyone's time saying the whole title. If you'd like to read it, you can go read it, I guess. If you haven't heard this is the newest 24th studio release from the band, and their second, I guess technically third kind of leap into metal on a studio album. The first really being Great Chain of Being, and then the full record with Rat's Nest, and now this huge amalgamation of, jam, music, metal, prog, thrash. It's, kind of got the whole, oasis of King Gizzard's heavier sound worked into it, even with, kind of rock anthem moments like Witchcraft or with Supercell, kind of being these, catchier rock songs. And I've given this album several listens. I am very into the production on this record, but only a little bit more so than the records that precede it. I think what I'm really mostly into is them returning to this style of music. Rat's Nest is, one of my favorite albums from the band, and like so many other people, have been waiting for them to return to this kind of sound. But, and I don't mean to keep saying but as though there is like a crux to this, or that, there's something wrong with everything, because this album is fantastic. There are so many, maybe I can just start with that. There are so many great things about how they went about defining this record thematically. This is, it's a pretty key topic as far as reinstating themes that they've been pushing down their listeners' throats and, beyond their listeners, kind of pushing into the world for such a long time. But this is kind of the first formal reapproach to a full-on story within an album, which I was incredibly excited to hear. And there's even more for it if you have been lucky enough to hear that sounds so stupid. If you've been able to hear the bonus track with the Leah Senior kind of story breakdown with the ambience and all of that going on, it really is quite nice how they've continued this trend of kind of a modern take on the King Gizzard narrative album. Very, very refreshing, very nice to hear the new production techniques taken with this much tighter, faster, and complex record. Right off the bat, Motor Spirit is, an incredible feat of performance, but it definitely starts this trend on side A where I feel that the songs themselves are seriously lacking in depth beyond, the first few minutes. That can't really be said with Motor Spirit because it is such a long song and there are so many different parts, but many of those parts hit much stronger than others. and are much less memorable than the longest track on this album being Dragon. And I feel as though, songs like Supercell, Converge, Witchcraft are, fine and have their own merits, but really are lacking in that same kind of depth. When it comes to the production, I feel like there could have been, more sounds other than the guitars, the bass, the drums, and vocals. It was exciting to see that Ambrose was kind of unleashing this new voice on this record, but I was sad to kind of discover that there was not going to be that, flair of harmonica in with this as well, along with other percussive elements and synthesizers throughout this record. I thought definitely with the, kind of industrial future apocalypse theme, there would be a little bit more of an electronic kind of vein to this album, especially with the confirmed sort of sister record to this that is meant to be in some way a techno album. And I think that I'll immediately say that while I'm on it, that Flamethrower is the best track maybe next to Dragon on the album, because of the way that it utilizes this transition into electronica towards the latter half of the song. I think it's another way that King Gizzard are still reminding people that they're able to push into boundaries that, yes, have been tested before. It's, something very reminiscent of, other bands that incorporate electronica into their music, but at the same time, really doing something with the narrative and with, taking what they've done as far as, prog rock and their jam albums and their ability to write cohesive narrative experiences and really pulling it together into a succinct listening experience. I think that they've accomplished something really, really good with pulling this album together in the way that they did, but I feel like they aren't spending enough time to really refine some of these moments to leave a greater impact than they have, that they actually have potential to do. Take Supercell, for instance. I feel like the way this song starts is so mind-numbingly repetitive that it almost yearns for something to be in place there, or maybe taken out of place, to really charge up the hype of this, second track on an album with a title like this. I just can't help but think that yet again they've sold themselves short in a few ways while accomplishing so much that just leaves a lot to be desired. So that is kind of just an overall general point towards Petro, but really excellent, really great record. Like, it feels so weird. Like, I'm just like naming all my problems with these albums, but at the end of the day, I'm like, great record. Like that was really, really cool, and I had fun listening to this, and I'm going to be listening to it again. But just to kind of reinstate it, I'm going to say again, these are my thoughts on King Gizzard, on the band's, kind of move through time. I feel like a lot of what I've said has, mirrored the band's trajectory in some way, as far as how much I've repeated myself and, reinstated the same themes throughout. So I can't say too much, but I definitely wanted to start this conversation. I wanted to open up the chat as far as how people really feel about this. I don't know if I will necessarily make another King Gizzard explained video for this reason. I really don't know if there will be much to talk about, unless maybe they don't make a record that is solely focused on kind of the threats of humanity towards the environment. I think it's a great topic that they choose to come at in a really refreshing way every time. I'm always really enjoying these experiences that they're crafting, but over time, there's less and less to talk about when it comes to listening to their records because they've already said it so many times. It's something I would be highly interested in hearing from the band themselves. I don't know really what their kind of response to this sort of discussion would be. And I'm calling it, a discussion. This is not a critique. This is not an argument. I really don't even know what exactly I'm going to title this video, but obviously if you're listening to it or whatever, you can see what that is, but it'll probably just be, a discussion of some kind. But I'm not going to do too much more with this, though. I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up. I haven't had water this whole time, so it's gotten much more difficult to talk as this has gone on. And with that, I have much less to say. So, okay, yeah, I'll go ahead and say, if you've made it this far, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. I guess I apologize if you had maybe been expecting an Omnium video. I could potentially be interested in making videos on other albums outside of King Gizzard in the nearer future. I just haven't really gotten my thoughts together on those, and hopefully those will maybe someday happen in the future. But in the meantime, I guess this is it. So thanks for watching again, and peace out.